There is a staircase in Delft, narrow, lime-washed plaster. In the wall, at the height of a man's chest, two ragged holes where lead slugs tore through cloth and flesh and lodged in the masonry. The holes are still there. They have been there for nearly 440 years. On the 10th of July, 1584, William of Orange, the man the Dutch would come to call the father of the fatherland, finished his midday meal, stepped onto the foot of that staircase, and a Catholic law clerk named Balthasar Gérard stepped out of an alcove and shot him at point-blank range. It was the first recorded assassination of a head of state with a concealable firearm. This is the story of what they did to the man who pulled the trigger. The popular framing is that Gérard was boiled alive for 3 days. That framing is wrong. The truth is, in some ways, worse, and in every way, more deliberate. The ban of 1580. To understand the man with the pistol, you have to understand the document that put him there. On the 15th of March, 1580, Philip II of Spain, through Cardinal Granvelle, issued the ban of prescription. It was, in effect, a contract. The ban declared William a traitor, a miscreant, and a pest on the whole of Christianity. Then it offered terms: 25,000 crowns of gold, payable, in the document's own phrase, immediately after the deed shall have been done, a patent of nobility for the assassin's family, a full royal pardon for any crime, however heinous, the assassin had committed before the act, and the right to seize William's property and estates. It was a crowdsourced assassination, the wealth of the Spanish Empire put on one man's head and offered to whoever in Christendom would take it. 2 years before Gérard, a Basque clerk named Juan de Jauregui had already tried, shooting William through the neck at a banquet in Antwerp. William survived. Though the ban did not need to succeed quickly, it only needed to keep producing volunteers. By the spring of 1584, a new one had arrived in Delft. The law clerk from the Franche-Comté. Balthasar Gérard was born in 1557 in Villefranche in the Franche-Comté, a militantly Catholic territory of the Holy Roman Empire, firmly inside the Habsburg sphere. His father was a jurist. 2 of his brothers became priests. He was educated in law at the University of Dole. He was small. Contemporary accounts agree on the slight build and the unremarkable face. What he had instead was a devotion to Philip II and to the Catholic Church that approached the pathological. When the ban was published, Gérard was approximately 22. The chronicles record that he secured a dagger, drove it into a doll he had made of William, and swore a holy vow to enact the king's will. From that moment, the rest of his life is a single line of motion towards Delft. He spent 4 years working his way towards William, first in Luxembourg as a clerk in a Spanish-aligned army, then in Tournai presenting himself to the Duke of Parma. Parma's officers offered him little, but did not send him away. Gérard understood he would have to engineer the infiltration alone. He constructed an alias to disarm William's court, François Guillon, a French Calvinist whose father had been martyred for the Protestant faith. William's court considered itself a sanctuary for persecuted Protestants. In May of 1584, Gérard arrived in Delft with counterfeit wax seals, gained an audience, and was integrated into William's intelligence network. In early July, he came back from an errand to France with no weapon and no money to buy one. On Sunday, the 8th of July, 2 days before the murder, he loitered in the courtyard of the Prinsenhof. A halberdier asked what he was doing. Gérard, in character, said he wanted to attend the Calvinist service across the way, but his clothes were too tattered. Word reached William. The prince, moved by the piety of the impoverished exile, ordered that Gérard be given 50 crowns to buy proper clothes. The next morning, Gérard took William's charity and used it to buy a pair of heavy wheel-lock pistols. The court records note that he haggled the price down and demanded specific chopped lead slugs rather than musket balls to ensure maximum tissue damage. The Prince of Orange financed his own murder. 10 July 1584. The Prinsenhof in Delft is not a palace. It is a former monastery, modest, unfortified. Gérard had presented himself that morning under the pretext of needing a passport signed. He was told to wait in a dim, recessed alcove at the foot of the staircase that connected the dining hall to William's private rooms above. At about 2 o'clock, the meal ended. William emerged and stepped onto the lower stairs. Gérard came out of the alcove and drew the wheel-lock pistol from beneath his cloak. The wheel lock was new technology, a firearm that did not require a burning match cord that could be carried concealed and fired in one motion. As Lisa Jardine argued in The Awful End of Prince William the Silent, it was the technology that made the entire act possible. He fired once, into William's torso, at a range of perhaps a meter. 2 of the 3 lead slugs passed clean through the prints and embedded themselves in the plaster wall behind. They are the holes Delft preserves to this day. William collapsed backwards into the arms of his master of the horse. The traditional account, recorded that same afternoon in the official minutes of the States General, holds that, as he fell, he spoke a final prayer in French. Mon Dieu, ayez pitié de mon âme. Mon Dieu, ayez pitié de ce pauvre peuple. My God, have pity on my soul. My God, have pity on this poor people. Though modern scholarship is skeptical, Charles Vergeer in 1981 argued, the prayer is propaganda, that 2 point-blank gunshots through the heart and lungs make a perfectly balanced bilingual sentence physiologically improbable. William likely died at once. The line was almost certainly composed afterwards by his chaplain to canonize him as a martyr. Either way, William was dead. Gérard ran, out through a side door, over the garden wall, towards the city ramparts. He had pig bladders sewn into his clothing to swim the moat. He never reached the water. William's halberdiers caught him, beat him close to death, and dragged him to the city jail. This is the moment the 4 days begin. The Interrogation, 11 to 13 July. The Hof van Holland, the High Court of the province, assumed jurisdiction immediately. Gérard was not a problem of confession. He confessed proudly on the first day and continued confessing every day after. What the court needed was the network, any controllers in Parma's apparatus. To get it, the court applied the full machinery of early modern judicial torture. The first instrument was the strappado. Gérard's arms were tied behind his back, a rope was run from his wrists up over a pulley, and he was hoisted into the air by the wrists alone. Weights were attached to his feet, and the rope let slack and jerked taut again and again. The mechanism dislocates the shoulder joints and tears the rotator cuffs. The second instrument was the boots. The phrase in the records is the Spanish boots. Gérard's lower legs were encased in tight, wet leather casings, which were then heated. As the leather contracted, it crushed the bones of his feet and lower legs, while the heat burned the tissue underneath. This is the punishment popular memory has, over 4 centuries, converted into the phrase boiled alive, because boiling water was sometimes used to heat the boots, and because 19th century historians fond of vivid prose collapsed the distinction. The punishment was not boiling. It was the slow destruction of the bones of the feet. The third instrument was the post. Each day, Gérard was bound to a post outside the jail and flogged. The whips flayed the skin off his back. After each flogging, while the muscle was exposed, his wounds were doused, the records are precise, with raw brandy, vinegar, and salt. He was tortured this way for 3 days. He gave them his alias, his path through Luxembourg and Tournai, his audiences with Parma's deputies, and he refused, every time, to give them a single co-conspirator. He had acted alone, driven solely by his obedience to God and to the ban. The interrogators concluded he was telling the truth. On the 13th of July, the court passed sentence. And now, back to the scaffold. 14 July, 1584. The execution took place in the Markt, the central square of Delft, in front of the Stadhuis, on the morning of the 14th of July, 1584. The sentence was for parricide against the father of the fatherland, and under early modern jurisprudence that meant the maximum permissible destruction of the offender's body. Each stage was specified in writing. The first stage was the hand. The doctrine is poena talionis. The offending limb is punished separately and first. Gérard's right hand, the hand that had drawn the pistol, was bound, and a red-hot iron was applied to the wrist until the hand was burned off. He was kept conscious. The court records specify this. The second stage was the pincers. The executioner used red-hot iron pincers, reheated in a brazier between applications, to grip the muscle of his body in 6 places and tear it from the bone. The third stage was the abdomen. While Gérard was still alive, the executioner cut his belly open and pulled out the entrails by hand, while the prisoner could see it being done. The fourth stage was the heart. The executioner reached into the chest cavity, severed the heart, and threw it into Gérard's face. The phrase in the modernized translation of the court records is flung in his face. Only then did they cut off his head. The head was set on a pike behind the Prinzenhof, looking back at the building where William had died. The 4 quarters of his body were displayed over the gates of the city. Though the most discussed feature of the execution in every contemporary account is what Gérard did during it. Through the burning of the hand, through the pincers, through the disembowelment, through the tearing of the heart, he made no sound. He did not groan. He did not cry out. He did not beg. He went through every stage of his own dismantling in absolute silence. The Protestant authorities found this terrifying. The Catholic propagandists found it useful. Within months, Jesuit hagiographers were composing martyrologies built around exactly this fact. A man taken apart on a scaffold without a sound. Lobbying for his beatification was raised in the Vatican. It stalled. What was not there, and what was? The phrase Balthasar Gérard was boiled alive for 3 days, which circulates in modern aggregator articles and true crime listicles, is not in the records of the Hof van Holland. There is no boiling on the scaffold of Delft, no cauldron, no oil, no molten lead. The myth has 3 sources: the Spanish boots in the cell, where boiling water was used to heat the leather; the execution, 26 years later, of François Ravaillac, the man who killed Henri IV of France, which did involve the pouring of boiling oil and molten lead into open wounds on the scaffold, and which modern memory has bled into Gérard's death; and John Lothrop Motley, whose Rise of the Dutch Republic in 1856 used the imagery of boiling so consistently for Habsburg punishments that popular writers attached it to the most famous execution of the Dutch Revolt. Though the question, whether this was the most brutal execution of a regicide in European history, does not actually rest on whether or not he was boiled. It rests on the criterion. If the criterion is the spectacle on the day itself, Gérard does not hold the record. Ravaillac in 1610 and Robert-François Damiens in 1757 both endured longer scaffold sequences, with wounds packed with molten lead, boiling oil, burning pitch, and resin. Damiens was drawn by horses for several hours, the executioner having to sever his tendons before the limbs would detach. The scene Foucault opens Discipline and Punish with. Though if the criterion is the total continuum of state violence, the full 96 hours from capture to severed head, Gérard's claim is the strongest in the European record. Damiens and Ravaillac suffered their primary torments on the day they died. Gérard suffered for 3 days first. The aftermath was as the ban had promised. Philip II kept his side of the contract. Gérard's parents were granted 3 estates in the Franche-Comté, and the family was elevated to the peerage. Though the republic the killing was supposed to break did not break. William's son, Maurice of Nassau, took the office of stadtholder, and within a generation, the United Provinces had won their independence. The bullet holes were left in the staircase wall. The man who put the holes in the staircase spent 4 days dying, 3 in a cell, 1 on a square. The popular version says he was boiled alive. The records of the Hof van Holland are more specific, and in the specificity is the horror. He never made a sound through any of it. Whether that is the most brutal execution in European history depends on how you measure brutality. Whether it is the most deliberate 4-day dismantling of a single human body the European judicial record contains, that is not really in dispute.